$50,000. That's the outrageous sum my hoe tried to wring out of me, all because I was grilling on my own property. After years of quiet, neighborly living, they suddenly accused me of trespassing on community land and even sent the police straight to my front door. Between the wail of sirens and the prying eyes of half the neighborhood, it hit me. The hoe had missed one crucial detail, something old, tucked away for years, that could flip their accusation into a crushing counterstrike and leave them no choice but to back down. And the real twist in this story is still ahead. My name's Jack Morrison, and if you're guessing I'm the kind of guy to lock horns with a homeowners association, you'd probably be wrong. I'm 62, a retired firefighter who once served in Montana's remote wilderness stations. 3 years a widower. I live alone in the lakefront home my father left me, a place where everyone knows your name and you wave to passing cars. I'm the guy who helps jumpstart a frozen battery in the dead of winter and hosts a monthly barbecue that's become a small-town tradition. For 15 years, the first Sunday of every month brought the smell of hickory and mesquite drifting over Clearwater Lake. Folks would wander over with folding chairs and side dishes, kids would splash in the shallows, and laughter carried across the water. It wasn't extravagant, just the kind of gathering that makes a neighborhood feel alive. On that particular July morning, things began like any other. I rose early to check the weather. Clear skies, a light breeze, perfect for keeping smoke from getting too heavy. My backyard runs all the way to the water's edge, where the dock my dad built back in the 70s still holds strong. My smoker, a homemade contraption I welded from an old propane tank, sits on a concrete pad about 50 feet from the shoreline. It's not much to look at, but it works like a charm. As the coals caught and I rubbed down the brisket, my eyes wandered to the lake. I thought of my father, remembering how he'd wipe his hands on his apron, point toward the water, and say in the steady voice of his, "Son, this land was ours before they even showed up." I never fully grasped what he meant. By the time he passed, I was 40. And the area had already shifted from a scattering of lakeside cabins to a neatly organized suburban community, complete with streetlights, sidewalks, and, eventually, the dreaded HOA. That association formed a decade ago when enough newcomers decided we needed community standards and property value protection. I attended a couple of early meetings out of curiosity but quickly realized I was better off keeping my lawn trimmed and my head down. They seemed harmless enough, sending reminders about where to store trash cans and how early to hang Christmas lights. The first hints of trouble came about 3 weeks before the showdown, though I didn't realize it at the time. I started getting HOA emails about noise complaints tied to my barbecues. Some residents said it disrupted their weekend peace. I laughed it off. In 15 years, no one had ever complained face to face. If anything, folks seemed to count down to the first Sunday, kids playing in the water, parents relaxing with a drink, old neighbors reminiscing about the past. It was the sort of tradition you'd think a community would protect. But that July morning, as I seasoned the meat and the sun climbed over the lake, something felt off. The usual early birds were nowhere to be seen. Mrs. Chen, who always brought her famous potato salad, passed my driveway without a glance. The Martinez kids, who loved fishing off my dock, were bundled into the family SUV without so much as a wave. Even Pete, the man I once dragged out of a burning trailer, avoided my gaze. That's when the black BMW appeared, looking far too sleek for our neighborhood of pickup trucks and minivans. It pulled into my driveway with an air of entitlement, and out stepped Veronica Clark. I'd seen her at home meetings, always dressed as if she were heading into a high-stakes corporate takeover. Today was no exception. Her blonde curls were flawless, her tailored black suit gleamed like polished armor, and her expression could have frozen boiling water. She scanned my barbecue setup as if she'd stumbled onto a crime scene. "Mr. Morrison," she began, her voice steeped in authority, "I'm Veronica Clark, president of the Clearwater HOA Board. We need to address your repeated violations of community property guidelines." From her leather portfolio, the kind that could cost a week's wages, she produced a yellow sheet of paper. My stomach dropped. "This is an official notice that you've been fined a total of $50,000 for repeated trespassing on community property." I stared at it, certain I'd misread. "Ma'am, there's got to be a mistake. This is my land, I have the deed, the tax records, everything." Her smile was the kind you'd expect from a predator circling its prey. If you'd kept up with your certified mail instead of letting vandals destroy your mailbox, you'd know this assessment has been accumulating for 6 months. $5,000 for each monthly violation, plus legal and administrative costs. She gestured toward my broken mailbox. Say knocked over by bored teenagers a couple months back. I'd meant to fix it, but with rural mail, I usually just collected packages at the post office. Your barbecues, she continued, take place on designated community waterfront property, a land shared by all residents of Clearwater Development. Then came the distant wail of sirens. Veronica glanced at her watch. Perfectly timed. I've also filed a complaint with the Sheriff's Department for noise and trespassing. They'll be here any moment to ensure you understand the seriousness of this matter. The sirens grew louder. Neighbors emerged, some worried, others eager for a spectacle. And as Veronica stood there, waving the yellow paper like a royal decree, the weight of $50,000 in fines pressed down on me, that's when I knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an attack. This wasn't just a petty fine, it was a calculated strike meant to wear me down, to push me off the land my family had held for generations. In that moment, my father's old words rang in my ears with a weight I'd never felt before. This land was ours long before they came along. The sheriff's cruiser rolled into my driveway just as Veronica wrapped up her explanation of how my friendly neighborhood cookouts had somehow been twisted into a $50,000 crime spree. Sheriff Tom Henley stepped out, moving like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. Tom and I went back decades, to my firefighting days. We'd been on more than a few scenes together, car wrecks, house fires, rescues across 3 counties. The look on his face told me all I needed to know. This wasn't a friendly drop-by, and he hated being here. Jack, he said with a weary sigh, I've got a complaint about noise and trespassing. You know I don't want to be doing this, but I've got to follow procedure. His eyes darted toward Veronica, who stood by her BMW looking smug, like she was watching the last piece of a plan lock into place. Then came the squeal of tires behind him. My daughter Emily, arriving in her little Honda Civic. Her timing was as sharp as ever. She'd had that knack since she was a kid, appearing right when something was about to get interesting. Now 28 and one of Channel 7's fastest rising investigative reporters, she stepped out with her phone already rolling. Dad, what's going on here? She demanded, scanning the scene like it was a live broadcast, which, as it turned out, it soon would be. I barely got out, Emily, honey, before Veronica cut in with the precision of a courtroom prosecutor. Miss Morrison, your father has been repeatedly violating community property regulations by hosting unauthorized gatherings on waterfront land belonging to all Clearwater residents. Despite multiple warnings and escalating fines, he's refused to comply with binding HOA rules. Emily's eyebrows arched. I could see the journalist in her kicking into gear. She fired off questions rapid fire. What specific rules? When were these so-called warnings issued? And how does the HOA claim authority over lakefront access that's clearly part of my father's property? Tom shifted uncomfortably. Jack, I've got to issue this citation for noise and trespassing based on the complaint we received, he said, his tone low. Doesn't mean I agree with it, but you need to take it seriously. He handed me a slip of paper that felt heavier than steel. You've got 30 days to respond. Get a lawyer. Seriously. The way he stressed that last word was his way of telling me this was about more than barbecues. While we spoke, Emily went live on her personal social media. This is Emily Morrison reporting from what might be the most absurd abuse of HOA authority I've ever seen, she announced, panning her camera across Veronica, the patrol car, and my humble barbecue setup. My father, a retired firefighter who's hosted community cookouts for 15 years, is being fined $50,000 for barbecuing on his own property. Within minutes, the viewer count was soaring. Comments and shares exploded, outrage pouring in from friends, neighbors, and strangers alike. Veronica, clearly unprepared for this level of attention, began to lose her polished composure as Emily grilled her about the HOA's legal standing, the suspicious timing of the fines, and the mysterious reclassification of private property as community land. The Clearwater covenants are clear on waterfront use, Veronica insisted. Though her voice had lost some bite, they protect property values and guarantee fair access to amenities. Emily wasn't buying it. Neither were the hundreds of people watching live and flooding the feed with fire emojis and the rapidly growing #BBQ. That's when Dorothy Hale appeared at the edge of my yard, moving slowly but steadily with her walker. The 75-year-old had lived here longer than anyone except me. She'd seen the whole transformation from scattered fishing cabins to the suburb we had now. "Veronica Clark," she called, her voice sharp as steel. "You should be ashamed, going after Jack Morrison like this." Her words seemed to loosen the tongues of a few neighbors who'd been hiding behind curtains, though plenty still stayed back, likely afraid they'd be the hoe's next target. "Mrs. Hale," Veronica replied with strained politeness, "this isn't personal, it's about compliance. Mr. Morrison has disregarded established guidelines, and the board must act on behalf of all residents." Dorothy wasn't having it. "Jack's family's been on this lake longer than any of us, before there was a development, before there was an HOA, before you ever set foot here. His daddy told stories about this land going back decades. Maybe you should be asking who really belongs here." As Tom wrapped up his paperwork, he stepped close and lowered his voice. "Jack, I don't know what this is about, but it's more than a noise complaint. Veronica's been digging into property records and development rights. Something's up. Jack, you might want to do a little digging of your own before this gets uglier," Tom said, his tone low and deliberate. The weight in his voice clung to me like a cold fog as his cruiser rolled away, leaving me in the backyards with Emily, a half-finished barbecue setup, and a controversy now streaming to thousands online. Emily lowered her phone, eyes sharp. "Dad," she said, "this isn't about barbecue rules. We need to figure out exactly what game Veronica Clark is playing." I looked out across the glittering water that had been part of my family's life for generations. My father had a saying, the knowing that quiet certainty when you could feel the truth hiding in plain sight. When something this deliberate lands in your lap, the cause usually boils down to money, power, or both. By the time the live stream ended, over 8,000 people had watched. The comment section burned with outrage, but Emily and I knew internet fury wouldn't win a $50,000 legal battle. Monday morning found us squeezed into the county clerk's cramped office, under flickering fluorescent lights that made everything look like evidence in a crime scene. Rows of dented filing cabinets lined the walls, each one holding decades of local history. Behind the counter, Pete Santuse, keeper of the county archives for 3 decades, greeted us like a man unaccustomed to visitors interested in dusty property ledgers from the 1960s. "Jack Morrison," Pete said, peering at me over thick glasses. "I remember your dad coming in years back, always asking about water rights and easements. Never did figure out why he was so concerned." That hit me hard. Maybe Dad's questions hadn't been idle curiosity, maybe they were preparation. Emily had spent the previous night doing what she did best, a digital sleuthing that would make a detective proud. Her laptop was a battlefield of sticky notes, screenshots, and maps. "Look at this," she said, pulling up a set of property transaction records. "Veronica hasn't just been buying houses around the lake, she's been piecing together an unbroken ring of waterfront lots. 3 in the past 6 months alone, all bought through shell companies, all for 30 to 40% over market price." The pattern was undeniable. Someone with deep pockets was orchestrating a land grab, and my property was the last square on their board. Pete helped us dig out the original 1962 survey maps, the year my father purchased our lot from the state. The papers were brittle and yellowed, carrying the scent of old paper and basement dust. What I saw made my head spin. The original property lines extended much farther into the water than I'd ever realized, covering a small, grandfathered parcel that existed before Clearwater Lake had even been created by the hydroelectric dam. "Your dad was sharp," Pete said, tracing the faded lines with his finger. "When they built the dam and flooded the valley, most owners got payouts and redrawn boundaries, but your land had a conservation easement baked in. That's rare." Before I could process it all, Emily's phone buzzed. Marcus Webb, an old college flame of hers and now a real estate attorney, was calling back. He still owed her a favor or two, enough to review our documents without billing his usual rates that could bankroll a small town. "Emily," Marcus said with barely contained excitement, I've been through the files you sent. There's a big problem for the HOA. Their authority comes from covenants filed in 1998, but your father's property predates them by more than 30 years. That should put it outside most HOA regulations. Hope sparked in me, but I'd been around long enough to know legal loopholes don't always hold. And as we waded through deeds, surveys, and court filings, doubt crept in. $50,000 was more than I had, and a court fight against a well-funded HOA could easily cost more. At 62, I wasn't sure I had the fight in me. The house felt hollow without the Sunday barbecue crowd. I caught myself imagining the ease of selling the place, heading for some quiet retirement condo in Arizona. Emily must have read my thoughts. She gripped my arm, eyes fierce. "Dad, you can't walk away now. This isn't just about you anymore." She pulled out her phone and played a voicemail from Dorothy that made my throat tighten. "Emily, dear," Dorothy's voice crackled through the speaker, frail but steady. "I never told your father this, but in 1999 when that boat flipped in the summer storm, he didn't just save 5 people, he saved me. I'll never forget how he jumped in without a second thought, diving again and again until everyone was safe. He's been protecting this community for decades. Now it's our turn to protect him." Her words hit harder than any fine. I could see the storm in my mind at the churning lake, the screams in the dark, my body moving on instinct. I never thought of it as heroic, just necessary. But hearing it now, realizing the impact, reminded me that some fights are worth taking on, no matter the cost. That night, as Emily left for her apartment to keep digging into the digital trail, I felt the shift. This wasn't about a barbecue anymore. That evening, after Emily left to continue digging into her research, I headed up to the attic with a renewed sense of determination. The place smelled of insulation and old cedar, and the stacks of cardboard boxes were blanketed in decades of dust. Most of the contents were the usual: birth certificates, military discharge papers, insurance forms, but buried at the bottom of the third box was something that made my pulse quicken. A cassette tape labeled in my father's neat handwriting, "Montana Water Rights Commission Meeting, August 1965. It had been years since I'd even seen a cassette player, but I knew Dorothy still had one tucked away with her collection of vintage music. If my father had gone to the trouble of recording that meeting, there had to be something important on it. By Tuesday morning, Dorothy was sitting at my kitchen table, her old cassette player placed in front of her like some relic from another era. It had real buttons, a slightly warped plastic casing, and a volume knob that crackled when turned. She'd brought it over along with a thermos of coffee strong enough to wake the dead, her face set with the quiet resolve of someone who'd learned that some truths take their time. "Your daddy always had a way of keeping good records," she said, settling into a chair as Emily arrived from Billings, laptop open and ready to capture every word. My daughter's anticipation was practically humming in the air as I pressed the play button. The sound of my father's voice filled the kitchen, a youthful but carrying the same steady authority I remembered from my childhood. "This is Daniel Morrison, speaking at the Montana Water Rights Commission meeting of August 15, 1965, regarding the perpetual stewardship agreement for Clearwater Lake and the surrounding watershed." The phrase "perpetual stewardship agreement" hit me like a gut punch. This wasn't about simple property ownership. This was about a legally binding responsibility meant to last for generations. The tape continued with unfamiliar voices as state officials discussing compensation for flooded farmland, environmental safeguards, and something called grandfathered conservation easements that would permanently protect the lake from commercial exploitation. Emily's fingers flew over her keyboard, her voice dropping to a whisper. Broken bar. "If our family holds a perpetual stewardship agreement, that's not just ownership. That's a federal-level environmental protection. It overrides anything the HOA can throw at us." While I was still trying to wrap my head around the scale of what my father had done, Marcus Webb called in. His tone carried the excitement of someone who'd just stumbled onto buried treasure. "There's a deed from 1962 in the county archives," he explained over speakerphone. "It was never digitized properly. The state granted your family perpetual ownership and stewardship of Clearwater Lake and its watershed in exchange for land given to the hydroelectric project." Emily's eyes widened. "If we own the lake, Every property in Clearwater development is technically landlocked unless they have easement rights. And if the agreement requires community events, a broken bar. She didn't have to finish the thought. I could already see the implication of my Sunday barbecues weren't violations, they were fulfilling a legal duty established decades before the HOA even existed. Marcus wasn't done. I also looked into Clearwater development. Look at the outfit buying up all of the lakefront properties. The managing partner, Veronica Clark. She's not just the HOA president, she's been orchestrating a quiet land grab, using her position to drive down your property value so she can force you out. It was all starting to make sense now. Dorothy leaned back with a knowing look, as though she'd suspected this all along. That woman's been sniffing around for months asking who's got the oldest deeds, who might stand in the way of development. She knew about your family's agreement before she even started this nonsense. Emily was already pulling public records, LLC registrations, and sales histories into a digital mosaic of wrongdoing. Dad, this is fraud. Conspiracy? Maybe even extortion if she knew about your stewardship rights when she issued those fines. The scope of it was staggering, but there was satisfaction in finally seeing the enemy's playbook. Emily called Judge Patricia Williamson, my father's old attorney, now in her 80s but still sharp as a tack. After hearing the summary, Patricia didn't hesitate. Bring me the documents tomorrow. If this holds up, the Morrisons don't just have a defense, we have a case. The weight in Patricia's voice carried the kind of certainty that could split mountains. If everything you found holds up, she said, the Morrison family has more than a defense. You have the basis for a countersuit that could dismantle Veronica Clark's whole scheme. Her confidence was like a song I hadn't heard in years. Still, I knew from long experience that the law was never a straight path to victory. That night, sitting on the dock as the sun laid streaks of gold and crimson across the lake, I felt something I'd been missing for weeks: a hope. Not just hope of winning, but hope that my father's quiet foresight and careful guardianship of this place would finally serve the purpose he intended. The water lay calm and endless before me, and in the evening breeze I could almost hear his voice, a steady, certain, reminding me that some duties are worth the fight, no matter the price. But Veronica Clark wasn't the type to fade quietly. By Wednesday morning, her counterattack came hard and fast. At 6:30, Emily called, her tone tight with both anger and a thread of fear. Broken bar, you need to see this. Veronica had hired a professional PR firm, launching an all-out smear campaign against me on every social platform she could reach. Emily sent the links of Facebook posts, Twitter threads, Instagram stories painting me as everything from an environmental menace to a dangerous recluse terrorizing children with barbecue smoke. The crown jewel of the campaign was a video that made my skin crawl. They'd pieced together security camera clips of me walking the property line, checking the dock, chatting with neighbor kids about water safety, overlaid with ominous music and captions about concerning patterns of behavior. They'd titled it, "Is Your Community Safe? The Truth About Jack Morrison." And in under half a day it had over 20,000 views. It wasn't just malicious, it was professionally done. This was no amateur rumor mill, this was a targeted assault backed by serious resources. Emily had been tracking the fallout overnight, and it was worse than I'd imagined. They're going after everyone connected to you, she said. Dorothy's home address and phone number had been posted online with claims she was enabling dangerous activity. 3 neighborhood families had already called emergency home meetings about the threat I posed, and that was just the warm-up. By Thursday, Veronica's team had crossed from slander into outright abuse of the system. Emily discovered a string of anonymous reports filed with government agencies, claiming my monthly barbecues were damaging the lake's ecosystem. The Department of Environmental Quality showed up at my door, clipboards in hand, ready to test the water as if I'd been personally dumping poison into a pristine mountain lake. The irony would have been laughable if it wasn't so maddening. I held a legal agreement binding me to protect this very lake, yet here I was accused of destroying it. What truly tipped me into fury was Emily's next find. Her investigation into corporate records and financial trails uncovered something far bigger than simple land grabbing. "Dad," she said, spreading printouts across the kitchen table like crime scene evidence, This isn't just about property. Clearwater Development's money is coming from Mountain Gaming Enterprise SA, owned by a Nevada casino corporation. They're not planning lakeside homestead, they're planning a gambling resort. It all snapped into place. Veronica's harassment wasn't personal spite, it was groundwork. She wanted to turn our quiet mountain retreat into the next Lake Tahoe, with casinos, towers, and tourists flooding in to crush everything my father had worked to preserve. That casino connection explained everything of the polished smear videos, the coordinated online assault, the bottomless resources. These weren't small-time opportunists, these were professionals used to steamrolling environmental laws, community protests, and regulatory hurdles. Emily also found county council donation records as substantial contributions from Mountain Gaming Enterprises, all in the last 6 months, lining up perfectly with votes to fast-track zoning changes for recreational development around the lake. By Friday, the campaign against me felt like psychological warfare. My mailbox overflowed with anonymous letters calling me a predator and an ecological criminal. My phone rang constantly with hang-ups and breathing on the line. Someone spray-painted "Lake Killer" across my garage door in a red so dark it looked like blood under the morning sun. The worst part was the sudden isolation. Longtime neighbors avoided my eyes, crossing the street when they saw me. Parents pulled their kids away if I walked past. Even the clerk at the general store looked at me as though I might have broken bar. The store clerk's wary stare said it all. The people were treating me like a bomb ready to go off. In under a week, Veronica had managed to turn me into an outcast in my own hometown. That's when Tony the Fish Marsley slipped up. Emily noticed him sitting in a gray sedan across the street from our house, snapping photos with a long telephoto lens like some budget detective straight out of a bad TV show. When she confronted him about stalking us and invading our privacy, he muttered something about documenting environmental violations for a mysterious client. His shaky delivery and obvious ignorance of environmental law made it clear he wasn't an investigator, just another pawn in Veronica's game. Emily jotted down his license plate and snagged his business card. A quick background check revealed Tony's true profession: digging up dirt on problem people for corporations that wanted them out of the way. The lowest blow came when someone filed a complaint with Child Protective Services, accusing me of being a threat to local kids because of my unstable behavior and obsession with the lake. Having a social worker on my porch asking if I was endangering children I'd known since birth was beyond humiliating. It was infuriating. That was the moment things became crystal clear. This wasn't about property rights anymore. It was about whether this community would allow deep-pocketed bullies with no conscience to steamroll anyone in their way. That night, sitting on my dock, I decided I was done. No more defending myself against lies. No more letting Veronica and her casino friends set the rules. They could play dirty, but I had something they didn't: the truth, the law, and a community that remembered what mattered when the cameras stopped rolling. Tomorrow, I'd remind them exactly who belonged here, and who was trying to destroy it. At 11:30 that Friday night, the call came. The voice was unfamiliar, but urgent. "Morrison, this is David Brennan. I used to be on the HOA board. I resigned in protest 3 months ago. I can't watch this any longer. I have proof of vote rigging, bribery, deals with outside developers. I know what Veronica's been doing." His words hit like a thunderclap. He had audio of board meetings where she outlined her casino plans, bank records showing payments to county officials, and documents proving she'd always known about my family's stewardship agreement. By sunrise, Emily and I had a plan. We would pull together the largest barbecue Clearwater Lake had ever seen, scheduled at the exact same time as Veronica's emergency home meeting, where she intended to vote on legal action against my family. Emily tapped into her media contacts, inviting 3 TV stations, 2 newspapers, and the regional EPA. I personally called every firefighter, veteran, and neighbor who'd ever come to one of my cookouts. Most importantly, I asked Chief Robert Crowfeather of the Blackfeet Nation, whose people had deep historical ties to this land, to attend as a witness. The morning of the showdown was flawless: clear skies, warm sun, and that crisp Montana air that makes you believe fate's on your side. By 10 a.m., my backyard swarmed with people carrying chairs, coolers, and a quiet determination that said they weren't going to be pushed around. Dorothy Hale rolled in with her grandson pushing her wheelchair, wearing a shirt that read "I survived Jack's BBQ for 15 years" and holding a sign that said, "Veronica Clark doesn't speak for us." Firefighters from 3 counties arrived in dress uniforms, the VFW raised the colors, and relevant Mike Thompson set up a PA system loud enough to carry across the lake. Emily, with her professional camera rig, began live-streaming the event. An audience of over 50,000 tuned in as news of the lake war spread. Chief Crow Feather arrived in traditional dress, holding an eagle feather that symbolized his authority to speak for the tribe, adding a level of respect that no PR spin could undo. When I stepped up to the microphone at noon, 500 people stood on my lawn, the scent of hickory smoke drifting across the water. I felt my father's presence beside me, as if he was watching his legacy being defended at last. "Friends, neighbors, fellow Montanans," I began, my voice carrying over the water, "my name is Jack Morrison, and according to state records from 1962, I am the legal steward and owner of Clearwater Lake." Cheers erupted, but I raised my hand for silence. For months, Veronica Clark has tried to paint me as a criminal, claiming these gatherings violate community rules. The truth? They're not violations at all. They're requirements under the conservation easement protecting this lake from exactly the kind of development her casino partners are planning. Right on cue, Veronica arrived in a black SUV, flanked by 2 men who looked like corporate enforcers. She crossed the lawn in her usual black suit, briefcase in hand, her expression like she owned the place. "Mr. Morrison," she barked into a megaphone, "you are in violation of multiple court orders and community regulations. I demand you shut down this illegal gathering immediately." The idea that I was hosting a legally required community event on my own land while Veronica demanded I shut it down was so absurd that people in the crowd actually burst out laughing. "Veronica," I said into the microphone, my voice steady but directed squarely at her, "allow me to introduce you to Chief Robert Crow Feather, who can explain this land's deep cultural and historical importance. Judge Patricia Williams, who can clarify the legal strength of our stewardship agreement. And Agent Sarah Collins from the FBI, who, I believe, has a few questions about your financial dealings with Mountain Gaming Enterprises." The stunned expression that crossed her face was worth every sleepless night she'd caused me. That expression deepened when Agent Collins stepped forward, badge gleaming, holding a warrant authorizing an immediate search of Veronica's home and business records. The FBI's involvement was thanks to Emily's tireless investigation, which had tied casino money to potential violations of federal gaming and interstate commerce laws. And the timing? Absolutely perfect, to turning our community barbecue into a showdown people would be retelling for decades. Veronica's security detail suddenly looked less menacing once federal agents began photographing license plates and checking IDs. The crowd's cheers roared so loud they might have carried to the next county. Tony the Fish Marcelli, deciding perhaps that cowardice was the better part of strategy, tried to make a getaway by swiping a jet ski from someone's dock. Unfortunately for him, the shallow shoreline trapped him in 3 feet of water. Sheriff Tom and I had to drag him back using my barbecue cart as an improvised rescue craft, a bit of slapstick that turned a tense confrontation into a genuine celebration. When Veronica was finally led away in handcuffs and the smoke from the grills drifted over Clearwater Lake, I realized we'd achieved far more than illegal. We know we'd restored a sense of community. Chief Crow Feather blessed the lake in a traditional ceremony. Emily's live stream had pulled in more than 200,000 viewers nationwide. Her board members scrambled to distance themselves from Veronica's mess. The casino project was dead, the bogus fines were gone, and for the first time in months, I could look out over the water without wondering who was plotting to take it from us. But the greatest victory wasn't in the courtroom, it was right there in my backyard. Dorothy Hale was laughing with friends. Kids were splashing in the lake while parents swapped stories over cold drinks. My father's careful planning had finally protected what mattered most. As the sun dropped behind the hills, painting the water in brilliant gold and crimson, it struck me, some battles are worth fighting, and not for what you might lose, but for what you're protecting for the generations to come. 3 months after what people were now calling the Great Clearwater Showdown, I sat in the governor's office in Helena, staring at an official document that would have made my father proud. Governor Martinez had invited me to discuss my appointment to the Montana State Parks Advisory Board and, more importantly, to hear firsthand how a retired firefighter's barbecue had exposed one of the biggest development scams in state history. "Mr. Morrison," she said, sliding the appointment letter across her desk, "your family's stewardship of Clearwater Lake is exactly the kind of community-driven conservation Montana needs more of. We'd like your help in shaping policies to protect other rural communities from predatory development schemes." The fallout from Veronica's arrest had been swift and thorough, surprising even Emily, whose investigative reporting earned her a regional Emmy nomination and a promotion to news director at Channel 7. Federal prosecutors built their case around money laundering, but what they uncovered also included bribery, fraud in the inducement, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and violations of federal gaming laws, serious charges that could keep her in prison for 15 years. Mountain Gaming Enterprises was hit with a $12 million fine and permanently banned from operating in Montana. Clearwater Development LLC was dissolved, its assets frozen, and the properties Veronica had scooped up through her shell companies were sold at public auction to help compensate her victims. As for Tony the Fish, he cut a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Veronica while serving 6 months of community service, ironically, helping me cater charity barbecues. His doomed jet ski escape became a local legend, inspiring memes and YouTube clips that transformed him into an unwilling folk hero of botched surveillance. "You know, Jack," he told me one day while we were loading smokers for a veterans fundraiser, "I never thought I'd say this, but your barbecue's a whole lot better than my pie work ever was." His turn from adversary to unlikely ally reminded me that people can change when given something meaningful to do. Dorothy Hale, meanwhile, became the unofficial historian of our win, spending her days writing a book on the development tours of rural Montana and serving as volunteer coordinator for what had grown into a statewide preservation effort. Dorothy Hale quickly became the unofficial historian of our hard-earned victory, channeling her energy into writing a book about Montana's rural development battles. She even took charge of organizing what had evolved into a monthly heritage celebration at Clearwater Lake. Her manuscript, tentatively titled "When David Beat Goliath: How a BBQ Saved a Lake," was already catching the attention of publishers eager to share our story of resilience. While reviewing her draft, Dorothy looked up at me and said, "Jack, this wasn't just about halting a construction project, it was proof that everyday people can still push back against corporate muscle when they have truth on their side and the guts to stand together." The court's decision had already begun influencing similar cases across the western states. Marcus Webb successfully filed a countersuit that not only covered my legal fees but also awarded damages for the harassment I endured. Judge Patricia Williams issued a formal opinion clarifying property rights for those with long-standing conservation easements. Meanwhile, the Montana Attorney General's office established a dedicated task force to combat rural development fraud, using our case as a blueprint for stopping such schemes before they could ruin other communities. The greatest changes, though, were right here at Clearwater Lake. What began as a neighborhood cookout had transformed into the Clearwater Heritage Festival, a monthly event drawing visitors from all over. Guests came to learn about environmental stewardship, grassroots organizing, and defending rural landscapes from corporate exploitation. Chief Robert Crowfeather became a fixture, sharing traditional ecological knowledge and explaining the deep cultural ties between indigenous peoples and the land. Emily's continued media coverage turned our lake into a symbol of successful community resistance. The economic ripple effects were striking. Property values climbed as new families sought out a neighborhood that valued quality of life over quick cash. The festival brought steady tourism revenue to local businesses, and the legal protections we'd established drew interest from conservation groups, which began awarding grants for lake upkeep and environmental education. Sheriff Tom Henley, now chief of police, told me during a fishing trip, "Sometimes doing the right thing means risking it all, but if you don't take that risk, you'll lose everything anyway." His words perfectly summed up the lesson we'd all learned when money and influence seemed poised to crush truth and community. That evening, standing on my dock as families laughed and played in the water, I felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with winning in court. It was about honoring the responsibility passed down through generations. Emily pulled into the driveway to set up for another live stream, probably to share news about Dorothy's book or the latest conservation grant. My phone buzzed with a text from a Wyoming rancher whose family was fighting a similar battle, asking for advice. As the sun dipped below the horizon, my father's voice seemed to echo across the water. Stewardship isn't just guarding what you have, it's ensuring the next generation has something worth guarding. The Heritage Festival had grown far beyond its humble beginnings, proving that communities can defend themselves when they understand their own strength and refuse to be cowed by money, politics, or legal threats. Walking back toward the house where Emily was preparing to broadcast to thousands searching for hope in their own fights, I realized the heart of our history wasn't the legal triumph. It was the enduring truth that ordinary people can still achieve extraordinary things when united for a cause greater than themselves.